everyone, and welcome to Microsoft Build 2022. My name is Chuck Heinzelman, and I am here to talk to you about a new feature that we are bringing into public preview this week, Azure Synapse Link for SQL. I am a principal PM manager on the Azure data team, and it is my team that is bringing this out to the public this week. I am really excited to talk to you all about this. Just a quick update on our agenda. We want to talk about what is this thing that we're calling Azure Synapse Link for SQL. Then we'll dive into a little bit of how it works, and then we're going to get into a demo of actually showing you this working and how you can potentially use it in your environments starting this week. So what is this thing that we're calling Azure Synapse Link for SQL? We really want to try to break down the barriers between OLTP systems and OLAP systems. Now, we have a product in market for Synapse Link with Cosmos DB. You might have heard of this, where you can take your operational data from Cosmos DB and link it to an Azure Synapse Analytics environment for advanced analytics. We are now doing that for SQL as well. This is not just for Azure SQL Database. This is also for SQL Server 2022 on-premises. So you will be able to get data out of your operational systems into Azure Synapse Analytics in a very seamless manner. We are going for near real-time analytics here, and we are really building this for convergence. We want to allow you to bring your disparate operational data stores into a common analytical environment with a minimal amount of ETL required. So how are we getting there? Well, we really want to make things easier for you to work with your data. Your data should be easy to get at, easy to operate on, easy to gain insights from. Your operational stores traditionally are just that, an operational store. And while we have technologies like column store indexes that make analytics on top of those stores better, a lot of times you still need to go into a full analytical environment to get the full advantage of working with your data. At the same time, we wanted to find a way to do a low-code or no-code solution for the movement of that data. People spend a lot of time building extract, transform, load pipelines to move their data around and then transform it into their target warehouse. We wanted to ease some of that burden with this product by helping you to actually do the movement of that data in a low-code, no-code way. And then we want you to be able to leverage the power of Azure Synapse Analytics. Synapse is a massively parallel data warehousing system that allows you to operate on your data, on large-scale data, in a very efficient way. And it's optimized to do that type of work where your operational systems are likely optimized for handling the transaction load of your business system. So we want to help you leverage that power that you have with Azure Synapse Analytics. So how does this work? What I'm going to walk you through is two different slides here of how this works. The first one is for Azure SQL Database. So what we have here is your Azure environment. So you have your Azure SQL Database here. So to get Synapse Link working and getting the data into Azure Synapse Analytics, you would first need to create an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. Same thing that exists today, has existed for a while since we released Azure Synapse. The standard workspace is where you will be doing your work and enabling the link, but you need to make sure you have an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. The next piece of this is a dedicated SQL pool in that Azure Synapse workspace. We are using dedicated SQL pools for this as the target for where your data is going to land. So you will need to create that on your own. It is not something that we create for you. You can create that and size it to your needs. Then we have these other two components. And when you set up Synapse Link, and we will talk about this in the demo a little bit later, when you set up Synapse Link, we configure a landing zone behind the scenes for you, and that is an ADLS Gen 2 storage account. You don't see it, you don't have access to it, but we do set up this landing zone to bring the data in as an intermediary stage. And then we are also running an ingestion service, which is the link behind the scenes. And that ingestion service does the movement of data into the dedicated SQL pool that is part of your Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. So the general flow here is your data in SQL Server gets output into the landing zone. When you first start the link, we output the entire table. So if you set up a table, you can set up multiple tables. When you do the initial setup of this, we export the entire table into the landing zone. And then from there, the ingestion service picks it up and loads it into your dedicated SQL pool. Once that initial setup has been done, now we are monitoring for changes as they happen in this data. So if you insert a row, if you delete a row, if you update a row, if you do that on batches of rows, we bring that information into the landing zone, and the ingestion service applies those updates to the SQL dedicated SQL pool in your Synapse workspace. So in near real time, we are bringing that data from your operational systems into an analytical workspace. This is happening as you go along. It's trickling the data through once that initial feed has been set up. So how is this different for SQL Server 2022? There are a few differences. The general mechanics are the same, but there are a few differences that we have between how it works in SQL Server 2022 and in Azure SQL Database. In this case, there's the separation between your on-premises system where your SQL Server lives and Microsoft Azure. You still need to create an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace in Azure. That still needs to be there. That is still managed by you. You also still need to create your dedicated SQL pool inside of that Azure Synapse Analytics workspace that we are going to use as the landing zone for your data. One bit of difference here is the storage account that we're using as the landing zone for the data that's being transferred, where in the Azure SQL Database world, that was managed for you. In this case, you need to create that storage account because your SQL Server on-prem needs to be able to write to that storage account. You need to take ownership of this storage account. This is an account, it's a transient account. We do not support using the data that lands in this account for any purpose other than Synapse Link for SQL. Since you own this account, you will be able to see it and you will be able to browse it, but we do not support making any changes or working with that data. We clean it up. We could change the file format at any time. We do not want you taking a dependency on anything that lands in here. That's a very important piece because since in this scenario you own that, you will have access to that account, but it's very important that you do not use it for anything other than the automated processes that Synapse Link is taking care of for you. The other thing you need to do is you need to install a self-hosted integration runtime on premises. For anyone that has done ETL work with Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse Analytics pipelines, if you've brought data from on-premises or from a VM, you've probably dealt with a self-hosted integration runtime. So you will need to install one of those on-premises as well. From there, when you configure the Synapse link in the Synapse workspace, again, we will have the ingestion service that we provision on the back end. And the flow is a little bit different in that the control for what needs to be done, telling SQL Server what to do, is initiated through the self-hosted integration runtime. So Synapse tells the runtime to tell SQL to start doing its job. SQL Server, again, same process here. The data will be exported. The initial snapshots will be exported and loaded in, and then we do the monitoring and watch for the changes that are coming through. but that does go into your managed landing zone. But from there, the ingestion service picks it up and puts it into your dedicated SQL pool in the Azure Synapse workspace. All right, enough diagrams. Let's actually jump into seeing this in action. So I am going to shift over to SQL Server Management Studio. What I have for this demo is we have the Wide World Importers standard sample database that we use. I have it loaded into a Azure SQL database instance running in my cloud subscription. So we have that was the setup that I did there. This happens to be a serverless pool, but you could whatever you need to set up there. You can look at our documentation for the list of supported sizes and environments. But in this case, I'm just running this in the cloud so that we can get at it rather than running an on-prem version of this. Now, there is some setup that needs to happen here. This doesn't just happen automatically. We say it's a low-code, no-code solution where you are not building these ETL pipelines, but there are some things that you need to do. You need to, again, create the dedicated pool. You need to set up some linked services. I don't want to go through that during this demo, so we're kind of doing the cooking show demo where we talk about all the ingredients and then, hey, we pull the baked pie out of the oven. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, but I want to talk you through what the ingredients are. The first thing that we have here is our dedicated SQL pool, and you can see here I'm running a DW200C. This sizing is up to you. You can choose the size that you need. If you have larger data volumes and want a larger size Synapse dedicated pool, you can ramp this up to a DW1000. So you could go higher than that if you needed to. This is going to be governed not only by the data being written in, but your output workloads. How many users do you have working on this? Because this is if you are familiar with the dedicated pools in Synapse, it is a slotted and queued mechanism where you have a certain number of concurrent operations based on the size of the pool. Dig into the documentation for that. We won't go into those details here, but know that you need to create this and you can size it to your needs. The next thing that I want to show you that we have is we have a linked service set up to the Azure SQL database. In this case, it's the Build 2022 SL SQL Server with the Wide World Importers Cloud database that I showed you in Management Studio. We need to set this up so that Azure Synapse Analytics knows how to communicate with it. From there, we then create the link connection. And this is where we have, in the slides that I had, we had that the service that's pulling the data out of the landing zone and into the dedicated pool. This is where this is all set up. And you can see here, we have the different tables from our source database listed out. We have the target tables that we want to put them into in that dedicated pool. You can change the schema name. You can change the table name. In this case, I'm mapping one-to-one, so I didn't bother with that. We also have for each table the distribution type. If you're familiar with Azure Synapse Analytics SQL pools, there are 3 different distribution types you can have for your table. You can support round robin, hash distribution, or replicated. In this case, I'm choosing round robin, which randomly spreads the data across the entire cluster. But if you have a good distribution key in your data, you might want to use a hash distribution. Or if it's a lookup table that you want across all of the nodes, you would want to replicate that across them. This is more of a standard data warehousing topic rather than a Synapse Link related topic, but we do allow you to make that decision on a table by table basis. We also allow you to define what kind of structure you want. Do you want it to be a heap? Do you want it to be a clustered column store index? You can make that choice, again, on a table by table basis. So you can see here, I have all of these tables connected in my Synapse Link, and it's already up and running, and this is all replicating If I click on the monitor link, you can see all of these tables are listed here, and it shows us the status. In this case, they are all set to replicating, which what that means is the initial snapshots have been taken, and we are now watching those tables for updates. And as the updates come through, we will apply those updates into your dedicated SQL pool. So why don't we do that? Let's go look at this table, and let's apply some updates to it. So I'm going to come over here into my Synapse environment, and if we look at the actual dedicated pool, we can see all of those tables listed here. They've been created in our pool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this query just to prove that I'm not doing demo magic here. And even though it's a pre-recorded session, I'm not just doing this and editing things together. We're actually doing this on the fly. You can see that our highest person ID is 3,261 on the Synapse side. If I switch into Management Studio, where I'm connected to the source database, I'm going to run that same query. And we'll see here, again, the highest person ID is 3,261. So since this table is in replicating mode, any changes I make to it on the source are going to be replicated over to the destination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert two new rows. The first one is myself. The second one is my alter ego if I were out on the country music circuit, which would be Doug Charles. Yes, I have thought about that. If you know me, talk to me about that later. But I'm going to insert these into that table on the source. So now if I run this query again, we can see on the source side that there's the two new rows, 4,000 and 4,001. So what's happening now is the Azure SQL database is writing those updates into that landing zone. And those updates are being picked up from the landing zone and applied over to the dedicated SQL pool in Azure Synapse. So if I switch over to my Synapse environment and I click Run, there they are. We have the two new rows that were automatically replicated from Azure SQL database into Azure Synapse Analytics for me. I didn't have to write any ETL code. I did not have to deploy an ETL pipeline. We don't have to wait for the next time that batched ETL process runs to have this data available to our analysts or to our reporting users or to our ML developers. This was happening in near real time. In the time that it took me to explain to you what was happening, that data was moved from the source system into the analytical warehouse. Great. But you might be asking, okay, that's great for once it's up and running. How do we add a new table? We need to add a new table to our database. How do we do that? Do we have to restart the link? What do we need to do? Well, let's go ahead and do that. So one of my favorite things to have in a database, whether it's a warehouse or an operational database, is a static table of numbers. They're great for joining. They're great for replicating test data and sample data. It's just a real nice thing to have around. It's just a single column table with numbers in it. In this sample database, we don't have one. So let's create one. So I'm going to make this table, and then we're going to put some data into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is put in a seed value, and then I'm going to say, you know what, let's change this to 10,000. So in this code, all it's doing is using the power of 2, exponential. That we're dealing with base 2 mathematics here. We're going to add, in this case, 16,384 rows to this table. So if I run this, it goes through and puts it in a couple of batches, and I will bring this up in the window here. We have a total of 16,384 rows with a maximum number of 16,384 rows. We always want that to be the same because they're just sequential numbers. Okay, that data has been added to our source database. Now we need to get it over to Azure Synapse Analytics. So we're going to come into our Synapse environment, And we are going to go to our build link cloud, which is our link connection here. And we have the option to add a new table. Let me just refresh the screen. And you can see here in this add blade, it's showing 1 of 32 items, 31 already added. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I can see my table, my static table of numbers I just created. This is querying the metadata off of the source database, my operational database. It sees that we have a new table here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that and choose add. So now in my Synapse environment, or in my Synapse link, I can make these adjustments. You can see that the tables that are in replicating mode are showing as gray. I can't edit them while the link is active, but this new one I can edit. I could change the schema, I could change the name, I can change the distribution. In this case, I want it to be replicated. This is the kind of table that is nice to have on every node of my cluster, so I want to have it replicated across all of them. And for structure type, I could choose, again, heap, clustered column store index, or clustered index. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as a clustered column store index. So how do I actually turn this on? And what else do I need to do? Well, the only thing I need to do now is click this Publish All button up at the top. And what that's going to do is it's going to publish that change out to my link. So when this publishing is done, what's going to happen now? So publishing has been completed. And if I refresh the screen, I can see that that's showing up as gray. So what's happening now? Remember, I did not create this table in my target data warehouse. I created the table in the source system. Azure Synapse Link for SQL is grabbing the definition of that table, creating that table in my data warehouse, and then doing the initial snapshot export of the data that's in that table. So if I go to monitor connection, depending on our timing here, we can see that it doesn't have a status update yet. But what's happening is it's getting ready. It's going to be doing that work. So it will create, like I said, it will create the table in the target data warehouse. Then it will do the initial snapshot and load that and start waiting for the trickle feed to come through. So if I hit refresh one more time, while I was talking, it actually went through the snapshotting stage. So it is already in replicating stage. What that means is I should be able to come back here. As you can see, it's not in my table list right now. It's not there at all. If I refresh my table list, I now have dbo.numbers showing up in my table list. And if I come and run the query, the same query that we ran in Management Studio, it brought over the 1,600 or 16,384 records that I initially loaded into Management Studio. Now, if I come back over here, you know what? Let's put in some more data. Let's take this up to 50,000 as the seed so that it will take this will take us up to 65,000 records in this table. Just to prove that out, I'm going to run this query again. So now in the source system, we have 65,536 records. What's happening now, as I mentioned, just like the other tables, those changes are being put into that landing zone and being picked up and loaded into our warehouse. So if I come over here, there they are. In the time that it took me to run that query and talk about it, the data has already been moved. This is the power of Synapse Link for SQL. We are allowing you to move data from source to destination without having to write ETL jobs, without having to wait for that batch job to run at the end of every day, or maybe even twice a day, depending on how often you run it. We were able to add a new table without having to redeploy an entire ETL pipeline. We added the new table to the source database. We added that table to the link. Synapse Link for SQL took care of creating the table in the backend pool for us and doing the initial population and getting things all set up for us. So with that, want to learn more about this stuff? Here's a couple of links for you. We have a getting started page in our documentation, aka.ms/sl4s getting started. We also have a how-to guide that we've created for this, aka.ms/sl4s how-to. In addition to that, we have the Azure Synapse Analytics landing page on azure.microsoft.com, which has more information about Azure Synapse Analytics in general. With that, I'd like to thank you for watching this build session. Enjoy Azure Synapse Link for SQL. We've enjoyed building it. We look forward to hearing your feedback on what we can do to make it even better for you. Have a great day.